Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, December 10th, 2023, and today we're going to be talking about the Republican candidates for president and how the Republicans, fundamentally, are screwing over their very easy chances at defeating Joe Biden with one candidate in particular. The 2024 GOP nomination process has largely been Donald Trump's race to lose, and surprisingly enough, he has not lost it. He has maintained a consistent level of momentum over the past couple of months that has put him at an upward trend over consistently maintaining, for the 6 months prior, a significant amount of support across the Republican electorate, hovering anywhere between 50 to 60% nationwide. Today, Donald Trump stands over 60% in terms of the amount of support he has across numerous other candidates that remain in the race even today. People like Governor Ron DeSantis, Governor Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Governor Chris Christie, and surprisingly enough too, Governor Asa Hutchinson, who has refused to drop out. Recently, Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, did in fact drop out of the presidential race. But with this 47.6% point lead for Donald Trump, a lot of people might assume that Donald Trump is in fact the most electable Republican. If the majority of Republicans are on his side, doesn't that mean that they would be coalesced around him in the general election? Well, that answer is honestly quite simple. No. What we found in a new Wall Street Journal poll is that Nikki Haley is in fact the most electable Republican on the ballot. And it isn't just her poll or the one here that shows her with such a significant lead. It is the average that we have seen across Trump and Biden, DeSantis and Biden, and of course, Haley and Biden. Donald Trump leads Joe Biden by roughly 2.2% nationally, according to a variety of new polls, including the most recent Wall Street Journal one that shows Donald Trump with a 4-point advantage over the incumbent president. Now, for Ron DeSantis, it's a bit narrower. There isn't as much support for him, and he ties in the most recent Wall Street Journal poll against Joe Biden. But the interesting thing about this Wall Street Journal poll, I think nothing can really prepare you for the lead that Nikki Haley has over Joe Biden in a head-to-head national matchup in this poll. Keep in mind, it's a Trump plus 4 electorate. It's a tied electorate when it comes down to DeSantis that turns into a Nikki Haley plus 17% nationwide. Now, this is not the only poll in recent time to show a significant lead for Nikki Haley as a Republican who's running around third, potentially even second place nationwide. Other polls too, Fox News, which had Ron DeSantis up by 5, Fox News, which had Trump up by 4, had Nikki Haley up by 10, 11. The Messenger, Harris X here, which had Trump up by 6, had DeSantis up by 2, has Nikki Haley up by 10. The overall average here, Nikki Haley wins by 5.8%. But I'm still very much caught up in this most recent poll from the Wall Street Journal. I think it is, in fact, if not the most damning poll that Republicans can see that shows that their overall candidacy choice for 2024 is moving in the wrong direction. While Donald Trump may be lead, a 2-point national advantage can absolutely be overcome. The Biden campaign is about to start full force campaigning for this re-election bid, whereas for the past year, they have laid low. They haven't ran many ads. They're not actively fighting for any primary, and the seemingly strategy here is to let the Republicans fight out themselves. Let the Republicans waste hundreds of millions of dollars in an internal primary and then strike in the general election while Donald Trump faces a lot of criminal allegations, a lot of criminal charges, and potentially even jail time, depending on how some of these cases end up. That's what the Democratic Party is counting on, and even before that, they're within striking distance to take on Donald Trump and face it off to be a very competitive election. Moving forward, though, looking at Nikki Haley, you simply don't see that. Now, Ron DeSantis, I think, is a non-starter. I don't want to waste time talking about Ron DeSantis because we just made a video talking about how his entire campaign is falling apart. I think that's true, and I think he will drop out before Nikki Haley does. On the Nikki Haley point, she's the only one here, with clear and consistent victories recently, especially in this most recent poll. Because regardless of how you cut it, regardless of the way you spin it, the electorate there wasn't skewed. The electorate here wasn't unfair. It had Donald Trump winning by 4. It had Ron DeSantis and Biden in a tie. But Nikki Haley wins by 17%. She reduces the amount of comfortable support for Joe Biden, dramatically dropping his bar. Keep in mind, he's averaging around 45% with a head-to-head matchup against Donald Trump, down to just 34%. He's 45 with Ron DeSantis on the ballot. He's 43 with Donald Trump on the ballot. He's 34% with Nikki Haley, with 51% overwhelming amount of independents, the overwhelming majority of independents backing her as well in this head-to-head matchup. And the reason why I think this does show, too, why there are a lot of political miscalculations and missteps for the GOP. It isn't just the Republican primary that really puts to shame the very easy victory that Nikki Haley could have should she make it through a better primary, right? I think if this was 2012, she would have landslided this election, because looking at that 17-point advantage, if that was to translate, and I'm not here to say that it would, but if it was to translate in 2024, this is the map you would see. A 17-point shift across the nation from the last election would result you in a map like this, with Nikki Haley winning well over 400 electoral votes, not a singular state being deemed safe blue, the only one being the District of Columbia. And looking at the rest of the swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Maine would go red. And theoretically, so would Washington, Oregon, Illinois, 3 states that haven't voted red since 1988. New Jersey, Delaware, Joe Biden's home state, would potentially even flip in that circumstance, and Rhode Island and Connecticut. Think about how crazy a map like this would be, which is why we don't entertain it beyond a pure hypothetical about a 17-point shift, but it does show that if that poll was even remotely accurate, which I do think there is some merits to it, we will talk about that, and there's a reason I'm giving it a lot of coverage. I think this shows just how powerful Nikki Haley is as a candidate. Like her or not, voters clearly do. And I think that is a problem for the Republican Party, that she isn't doing so well. Because time after time after time, we get into these conversations. Is Nikki Haley better than Donald Trump? Is she the most electable Republican? Republicans have an electability alternative, which is Nikki Haley, right? Nikki Haley is electable. Time after time after time after time, it is clear from my perspective, potentially from yours, from the perspective of political pundits, from the perspective of practically anyone outside the Trump campaign, they can see that Republicans have a winner. The only problem is that she can't cross the first hurdle, which quite honestly could be the most difficult one for her. Because without Donald Trump in the arena, I think Nikki Haley could do quite well. I don't know if she would. A lot of people's second choices when it comes down to Donald Trump is Ron DeSantis. They see Ron DeSantis as Donald Trump light. They see Nikki Haley as the enemy of Donald Trump. But that is another miscalculation that I think proves to the detriment of the Republican Party's chances in 2024. Because when Nikki Haley first announced all the way back in last year, around the December timeframe, Donald Trump Truth Socialed or tweeted out, whatever you want to call it, saying that he wishes her luck. He found her to be a good person. She was loyal in the administration. And though she had been to his opposition throughout the primary season in 2016, she had very much warmed up to him and grown to appreciate him as president of the United States. But as she started to rise in the polls, as she started to get more media publicity, more national attention, you found that she turned on Donald Trump. She makes an effort here in the most recent debate, even citing that Donald Trump added $8 to $9 trillion in debt and that it was his fault in the last election. And her philosophy really largely being Donald Trump was good for the time, is not good for now. He's the one who's going to lose to Joe Biden, not me, is something that Donald Trump is taking offensively and going on the offense against Nikki Haley, most recently calling her bird brain. He did this back in September. He did it again in October. Now he's done it in November. And just 2 days ago, or just 4 days ago, after the primary debate, Donald Trump did his rankings, and you can't see me right now, but I'm doing air quotes, his rankings of who won the debate. He had Vivek Ramaswamy as number 1, and then he had said, quote, bird brain comes in at number 2. That's how he refers to his former United Nations ambassador. That's how he refers to someone who many Republicans believe, many Democrats too, many independents, political pundits, whoever believe, is the most electable Republican. And when you have people like Kevin McCarthy coming out and saying Donald Trump should pick Nikki Haley as VP, it isn't just because of vibes. It isn't just because he likes Nikki Haley. It's because he sees that she is the one fix to the Republican Party's problems. Her stance on abortion is moderate enough that it's palatable. Her stance on a number of social issues is palatable enough that it is perceived as moderate. Now, I think when she said on the debate stage, the most recent one, that Ron DeSantis didn't go far enough with the Don't Say Gay bill, I think that's where she starts to get into a point where she could lose a lot of support. But that isn't publicized. She's not the mainstream candidate. There isn't enough, opposition research being done around her. And I think that looking at her as a candidate, looking at her as the GOP potential nominee, There are a number of things that might raise red flags, but I don't think they really matter as much as what's going to matter in the upcoming election. This isn't a normal election. This is an election, a rematch. The first one we have seen, a direct rematch, since Grover Cleveland. He's the only president to have ever done it. No president besides him has ever gone on to lose re-election and then win again. And I think that's something that you are going to see is a problem. Looking at the election for 2024, I think there is going to be a lot of missteps, a lot of miscalculations, especially ones like this, where Donald Trump goes after the most electable Republicans and drives them into the ground. It happened with Ron DeSantis, not because of Donald Trump that Ron DeSantis is disliked, but it did happen. He went on the offense. You started to see a lot of people pulling away from his campaign, pulling away from the idea of his electability. And I think that's something that tanked his numbers in the general election polls. That's something where you found Ron DeSantis to Biden when Donald Trump started railing on him heavily. There isn't, substantial reason to why Ron DeSantis' numbers decrease. But it's because there isn't a lot of enthusiasm or general trust in him, because he's getting attacked by the left, attacked by the right, and the center doesn't really know what to believe, and you find that it falls apart for candidates like this. Nikki Haley, fortunately enough, has been able to avoid that. Even with Donald Trump on the offense, it isn't tanking her in the general election, but it is his personal relationship and the way that he refers to her that would make a choice like her as vice president thus hypocritical. It would make a choice like her being involved in the campaign hypocritical, looking like she's doing something just for political purposes. And I get it, it's politics, but it won't play well to Trump voters who have been railing heavily against her, who are a substantial portion of the bloc that might be turned off by a candidate like Nikki Haley. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't vote for Donald Trump. They absolutely and enthusiastically would. But I do think there are going to be heavy concerns with having her on the ticket being such a big opponent to Donald Trump, not only in the past, but even recently. It made sense in 2016 when her name wasn't there, but when she personally is on that debate stage with 10 million plus viewers, and the clips are going to roll and roll and roll, the DNC research, the DNC ads, the Biden ads coming out of Wilmington, you are going to see that they will put Nikki Haley's words against her, against Donald Trump, what she has said about him, and there's not many ways to walk it back. It also just so happens to be that the one person that she would have to kiss up to for the presidential VP spot isn't going to take it. Donald Trump, of all of the Republicans, values loyalty the most. He turns on people very quickly, and he wants you to be with him through no end. Even when Nikki Haley decided to run, he wished her good luck, and that was a huge step out of character. But I think largely it was because they had a meeting before she decided to do it. She went to him, she went to Mar-a-Lago, and she talked about how she was going to run, and essentially, seemingly, got his blessing on that. And she initially said, if Donald Trump runs, I will not. She walked back on that, and a lot of other things too that made her now, in Donald Trump's eyes, perceived as someone who's wishy-washy, perceived as someone who's disliked, perceived as someone who doesn't contribute to the Trump message, the Make America Great Again movement, whatever it might be. All of it contributes to a very negative image for her amongst Donald Trump, and the one person who cares and has a huge ego on stuff like that is Donald Trump. I think that's factual. I think that's a fair assessment. I think that's the reason why Nikki Haley will not be added to the ticket, like McCarthy might suggest, like others might suggest, and I think that is going to be a problem for the general election. So all this talk about Nikki Haley, where does she move forward? I honestly don't know. I think she's right in her most recent assessment that following Iowa, her and Donald Trump will be in a two-way race, but I question to think what that two-way race would be. If we're looking down and boiling down to Ramaswamy and Christie and Hutchinson, that's only around 9% of the electorate. The rest seems pretty decided. 60% with Trump, 12% with Haley that will stay, and amongst Ron DeSantis' support, well, a overwhelming majority of them too in polls seem to suggest that Donald Trump is their second option. This vote here that isn't with Trump isn't necessarily anti-Trump. In fact, many of them are very pro-Trump. Vivek Ramaswamy, I can imagine, over 90% of his support will go to the former president. But I think what you will see is that there won't be as much consolidation, and Nikki Haley will come in place second nationwide, will make a name for herself, but will not ultimately make it to the White House, will not ultimately make it to a point where she is on the ticket. And I think you have people to blame, candidates to blame, voters to blame, people at large to blame. But Nikki Haley is clear right now and today as the most electable Republican for 2024, consistently and always polls well, most recently leading by 17 percentage points amongst an electorate that prefers Trump by 4 and doesn't prefer Biden or DeSantis. Think about that for a moment. I mean, just think about how many people were Biden against Trump, Biden against DeSantis, but all the way for Nikki Haley. That is a problem Democrats will have to tackle. I don't think a 17-point difference would be something that, would actually happen in a general election, and Democrats actually might have their problem sorted out for them by the Republican nomination process and Donald Trump himself. We will see what happens with the VP slot. We will see what happens as we move forward, who's going to be chosen, who's going to be involved, who's going to make a direct impact. But if I was to call it right now, it's very different than what I would have said 6 months ago. But I do not believe presently that Nikki Haley will be the VP spot for Donald Trump, and that's a problem for Republicans nationwide. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.